Hello and welcome to my podcast. Today's topic is going to be minority representation in Hollywood and film. So, the topic and genre of horror has always been one that's fascinated me. A lot of my friends have also been into the horror genre and everything and the themes it represents. One researcher notes the importance that horror genre has on minority groups. Harry Benshoff says that minority groups are often drawn to horror because it subverts the cultural norms that action or comedies often enforce. But another aspect of the research is rooted in the investigation of how Hollywood has been chalking these movies full of token characters, which are minorities that don't advance their own plot, but instead just appear to make the film seem more inclusive in order to sell more tickets to these minority groups. Therein lies the real argument that I have today. That oftentimes representation means nothing unless it's accurate representation. So, let's get into the facts. Researcher Harry Yen has spent time researching the effect that seeing LGBT people represented on TV has on the public's perception of them. His research, while admittedly inconclusive at times, determined that seeing LGBT characters on TV increases people's acceptance and perception of that group. Think about shows like Will and Grace, as well as Modern Family, that have slipped into mainstream pop culture. Magazine giant The Atlantic confirms the effect on society from their justly named article, The Modern Family Effect. They discuss polls which show that 27% of people became more pro same-sex marriage after seeing gay characters on shows, and anecdotes about watching Modern Family transform people's views on marriage. The reason behind this, Yan figures, is that when people lack interactions with people of the LGBT community, those represented on shows seem to fill in those gaps and substitute interaction with real people. This may sound like a stretch, but I don't have any non-binary or trans friends, but seeing those groups on TikTok helped me get to know them better and become more educated about them, as people are very authentic on the app. On the other hand, Hollywood has had a pretty rocky relationship with authentic representation. Only recently, let's say within probably the last 5 or 10 years, has there been a sort of renaissance in the film industry. The roles certain groups were often cast as started changing. For example, women who were often cast as the victims in horror began taking roles as the killers or as people who were able to fend off their attackers. Black people, who were often stereotyped and misrepresented as thugs, became the victim in Jordan Peele's Get Out. So, this recent renaissance is important because it doesn't have to do with more inclusion. These groups were already being cast in movies and TV. It was about an accurate portrayal of these groups. A researcher named Jason Smith exemplifies this idea with his studies on films and whether they fall into the category of color conscious or color blind. He defines movies that are color blind as films that exist post-racially, or in a society that no longer recognizes and appreciates race. Think about it this way. Everyone has that relative that when accused of being prejudiced or racist, often says something to the tune of, "I don't care if they're black, purple, yellow, whatever." Smith makes an excellent point about this view, saying, within this post-racial framework, colorblindness can be seen as a discursive tool to discount the significance of race in the United States. White people often use this stance to skip over the struggle people of color face that is often solely because of their skin color. And that's not to say we shouldn't see everyone as equal, but rather recognize what makes us diverse and the obstacles each person has had to face. Turning back to film, when movies include a diverse cast that has their struggles recognized, it paints a more accurate portrayal. Referencing Get Out again, the protagonist deals with microaggressions and the feeling of being out of place, showing how many black people feel as a minority group in the United States. Smith's research is aimed at representation by ethnicity, but can also easily be applied to other minority groups in the US. By other groups, I'm mainly going to reference religion as well as sexuality. Let's tackle sexuality first. Yan's research demonstrates that just being exposed to new ideas and ways of life can increase people's positive perception of LGBT people. But I've got a bone to pick with that line of logic. It is a fact that increased visuality in mainstream media helps minorities also become more mainstream and acknowledged. However, it's time to look at it through Smith's view. Accuracy is far more important than just having representation. Look, I'm tired of the way that gay men and women are portrayed in TV. Think about nearly every TV show that has gay people on it. Modern Family, Cartoon Big Mouth, Queer Eye, you name it. Many gay guys are portrayed as effeminate, flamboyant, and stereotypical. And that's not a problem. The problem is when gay men are only portrayed this way. I've had at least 5 people come up to me in high school asking, "Why doesn't your voice sound gay?" Or, "You must be bi or something because you don't act gay." Okay, hold on. Who said I had to conform to stereotypes, which are inaccurate, by the way, portrayed in film? Sorry, that was a little bit of a tangent. But here's the bottom line. Yes, I do appreciate the increased visibility of LGBT people on TV. I do not appreciate the fact that they are only portrayed as one-dimensional and stereotypical, because that's not accurate. Lesbians also face inaccurate portrayal in TV. Almost all lesbians in non-LGBT-centered shows are often portrayed as very masculine or butch. On the same hand, Lisa Lazard writes in her article that feminism is often misconstrued in TV. Lazard found that any film or show involving a female lead was automatically perceived as feminist, regardless of the content. However, if the lead strayed too far from heteronormative standards, they were seen as too masculine. So even when women are not meant to be perceived as masculine, if they are straying from the normal, that's how they are perceived. So you can imagine how a straight audience member would perceive a lesbian character breaking from heteronormative standards who is also written to be masculine. They're obviously going to be portrayed inaccurately. I believe this inaccurate portrayal is detrimental to LGBT people, as when people see these standards on TV, their minds automatically go to the farthest side of the gay spectrum, and in my experience and opinion, that's what leads to people using the D and F slur. I previously mentioned religious minorities that are also portrayed inaccurately. Muslim people and Jewish people are among the most egregious inaccuracies in Hollywood. Anti-Semitism has been around for decades in Hollywood. Villains' representations are often drawn with Jewish caricatures and stereotypes, and Muslim people have just recently gained portrayal in films. However, most of these films are violently Islamophobic, centering around the war in the Middle East. Movies such as American Sniper glorify violence against insurgents. However, that message translates to many Americans as just violence against any Muslim, period. Middle Eastern people in general are bashed by Hollywood's representations of them. Many films portray them as rich womanizers with loose morals, leading to very negative views. Nearly no TV shows would ever portray a normal teen in Michigan who happens to practice Islam. These religious minorities are unfortunately just the victim of the DoD-backed propaganda machine that is Hollywood. Here's the bottom line. Hollywood needs to do better. Many people talk about forced diversity and how it feels, well, forced. And that's because it is. Writers who know nothing about the group they're writing for force their characters to conform to this vision that's not accurate and therefore feels forced. If writers listened and learned about the groups they were writing for, then it would feel much more natural. And that seems pretty universal. Just listen and learn, and everyone will be better for it. Thank you for listening to this podcast.